Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 5 of Music Motion. We are so excited to see and hear everything that is going to be happening today in the episode. We have an incredible guest today. Tyler Bates is joining us, and Ollie, I'm just so excited. How are you? First of all, though, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How's it in London? I hear it's kind of hot.
Yeah, it's humid and it's muggy, and excuse me if I'm sweating a little bit. It's just it's really hot here. But it's interesting, Drew, because I'm in sound mixes right now, working with music on the show that I'm doing, and I'm feeling everything we've been discussing. All that stuff about getting the music to the final place. I'm doing that right now.
You're
So
you're
everything's coming together.
you're having a push right now, and you're working with a great composer too. Yeah, I mean, we should do a music motion just on your films and your music, the music you do in your work. But today is Tyler Bates, and boy, this is going to be great. Tyler is just fantastic. I'm so excited for our students to have exposure to this conversation and to participate as well. So I just want to thank Tyler in advance, and I'm going to ask you to introduce Tyler in just a moment. First, I do want to just make a note for everyone who's logged on now, especially to the Facebook and YouTube live streams, because Tyler's work is kind of the biggest kinds of projects that you find in Hollywood. YouTube is really great at detecting that stuff and pulling down the stream. We will, if you're on YouTube, we will get the stream back up, and we work it out after the fact in the archived episodes. We're doing all this stuff for education purposes and analysis purposes and fair use. It's all on the up and up. But the YouTube stream will likely come down at numerous points today. If you want to avoid that, go over to Twitch. It doesn't seem like the Twitch stream is as finicky about that. So just a little program and technical note there. And yeah, with that said, Ollie, do you want to introduce our fantastic guest today?
Yeah, and I also encourage anyone out there if they want to DM in while the show is happening and ask Tyler questions, please do that. I share your excitement, Drew. It's just so exciting and such a privilege to have Tyler, and I thank him massively. He's an incredible composer, and just thinking about his work and the shows that we've done already has had me thinking a lot that although what we're doing is an exploration of music and film, at a deeper level, it's also an exploration of creativity and how to be creative. And all of our guests have talked about it. The last episode was Zeltia. We talked about it an awful lot. How to be creative in something that can often be a business. From my side as a director, I often have to wrestle with things that have nothing to do with the art, budgets, schedules, producers, financiers, different groups of actors sometimes. And sometimes you find yourself sort of wondering, well, where does the creativity come in there, and how do I get to express myself? Um, it always felt to me that music was simpler. You could just pick up a guitar or play a piano and express yourself. But once you get into the fusion of music and film and commerce, it has complexities of its own. You have to deal with producers, you have to deal with directors. Often, as a musician, you have a budget where you have to pay for the orchestra, you have to pay for the sound engineers. And it can get very granular very fast. And the big question is, how do you express yourself within all of that? Because if you can't express yourself, then there's no point being that. Tyler is making films at the most commercial level. His films, I think he can say more about this when we talk, but I think his films have grossed something like $5 billion. He's making films uh, in the absolute apex of the kind of modern franchise universe, like Guardians of the Galaxy. But what's extraordinary about his work is two things. First of all, pretty much every Tyler film, you can identify his voice in the soundtrack, no matter how commercial that film is, no matter how well embedded the franchise is. And the second thing is that he keeps on extending himself in other arenas. He'll go off, he'll play guitar, he'll co produce albums, he'll start up side projects. And the thing that I love about this guy is how he keeps himself relentlessly creative at the very highest level of commercial art. And with that, it is my absolute joy to introduce Tyler Bates. Hello, Tyler.
Hi, Ollie. There's nothing more to say. Can't follow up your introduction. I'm just a guy. How are you, man?
Okay, I'm going to kick off with a really simple question, Tyler, which we ask everyone. And I know you come out of a kind of a rock and roll live music background before you got into film. But the question is, why is it you think that film music in particular is so powerful? And what is it that makes film or moving images and music work in this very particular powerful way?
Well, I mean, cinema has always been a very powerful vehicle for storytelling, and I think a lot of people process their own emotions, a lot of the dynamics of their life through film and through music, and when the marriage of the two, I think, can be extraordinarily powerful for people and leave very much an indelible impression because there is that connection to a very finite or important emotion or relevant emotion to a person. It's just like when people get older, a lot of the music they listen to is from their formative years because there's so many firsts that happen in your life during that time, and regardless of how far you've traveled since then, those initial firsts, I think, we carry with us for our entire life, and we feel that we remember them vividly, whether we do or not. So I do think that same premise is applicable to the way film music is transcendent to the audience, and obviously the marriage between that music and the picture is, in some cases, formative for all of us in all phases of our life. So you're seeing content now being very specifically designed to address the more personal dynamics of people, especially in the streaming world. There are shows that are created to explore sexuality or sexual orientation, marriage, which there's been a very top line examination into marriage until just the recent decades. So I think people are becoming a lot more comfortable with these topics that were really not common conversational topics 40 years ago, because now we're being able to go through the permutations of those, examining those dynamics of our lives as they're depicted in television shows and in films. And I think that that's a pretty powerful statement or form of storytelling to be part of as a creator of music. And at the end of the day, what we're doing is we are an aspect of that storytelling, which is, film is all storytelling and emotion at the end of the day. Words, no words; music, no words. So what is our role in completing or the director's vision or conveying the director's idea? So I'm open always, as to what that interpretation is, instead of me necessarily coming to the table with the I've been there, done this before, here's what I'm going to do approach. I really personally think that it's most powerful when a composer understands the sensibilities of the director and what's important to the director, just like in any important relationship of your life. That was a bit tangential,
Cool.
but there you go.
So you covered about 5 incredible topics in one answer. And based on that, I would actually quite like to start off playing coming with what you were just finishing saying, play Dawn of the Dead, because that's a great example of you connecting with the director's vision. And the sequence you got is an extraordinary express sequence. Before we play it, I'll just say, and we're going to cover this in the interview, but your range is fascinating. You know, you go from these huge sci-fi epics, which we'll talk about in depth, down to dialogue-driven pieces, all the way to Theme Park Rise and everything. But the range of that voice that you're syncing with directors is really interesting. Let's play Dawn of the Dead, guys.
Get back, Anna. Get back!
Jesus, just tell me what's going on.
I told you to get back.
Pure Milwaukee area. Information following Milwaukee information for local evacuation centers. If you live in Waukesha County,
Can you help?
St. Virginia Church, 22 Robin Lane. If you live in southern Milwaukee County, there's a shelter 1353 Henderson Road. If there is no activity where you live, stay inside and lock all doors. This is the emergency broadcast system for the greater Milwaukee area. If you live in Racine County, there is no information available at this time. Please stay inside and lock all doors and windows. Miller Park is no longer considered a safe haven. Please avoid the stadium and proceed to other locations. Meanwhile, civil unrest is still being reported in the area of the River Walk. Please avoid traveling. There are unconfirmed reports that several military personnel have fallen ill and that some military bases are no longer occupied as safe havens. The following locations are still listed as prepare a safe haven letter. Fort Pasco.
Okay. What I love about this clip is how complex it is. Would you like to just talk about the way you're weaving your music and the sound design and the visuals?
Well, it's interesting. I haven't seen that in forever. That's 18 years old.
Yeah.
That was great, though. That movie really began the in-depth exploration into modular synthesis that my longtime collaborator Wolfgang Mathis and I got into. At the time, we were mostly on MOTM rigs, but for me, I've always liked to create my own sounds. And in going to into Dawn of the Dead, one of the things that Wolfie and I studied was it was actually a German scientific study that was done in 1969. Of course, it's German. He's German. But it was a scientific study on how different frequencies and rhythmic pulses impact the heart and the mind in humans. And I'm fairly jaded when it comes to something that is going to scare me or whatnot. So I thought the best approach to this film would be to try and make people uncomfortable enough so they could receive whatever the jump scare is or whatever the gravity of the situation really is dramatically. Because as much as we're having fun in Dawn of the Dead, we wanted to take it seriously enough so that we do hope that some people make it alive, out of the film. But so yeah, that situation just starts off as being very odd and strange, and then the objective was to really create an epic scale theme that underscored the scope of how big this apocalypse could be at the time. So it was really a moment where everyone's just recognizing everything is the world is upside down, and then the initial efforts to survive. So it was a lot of fun to dig into that, I have to say.
That is one of the best answers we've ever had. German modular synthesis. I never even knew that existed. But what I love, the reason we selected that clip was it's so unnerving, and you have these kind of swells of orchestral stuff, and then this other stuff happening, and when the stings happen, they really hit you. So everything you said sort of snaps it all together. Did you feel it? The original of that film has a very different, but very well known score by Goblins. Did you feel that you were in any way responding to that, or did you just put that out of your mind?
Completely put it out of my mind. To be honest with you, yeah. I've been alerted to the magnitude of some of the properties that I've become involved with over my career. Yeah. And instead of diving way deep into the lore of whatever those properties are, I try to stay away from anything that would be imbued with public opinion or thought on the matter, because I feel like it would probably be a bit constraining for me. I know that no matter what, when I've worked on certain movies, they're kind of like lightning rods for debate. And there's always another approach that could be taken to a film. Some of it is obviously by my design, and some of it is obviously of the vision of the director and the collaboration with everybody invested in the creative aspect of a movie or a television show. So there's so many defining factors that go into what a score can be or ultimately becomes, and that doesn't even begin to touch on all of the semantics related to time and finances and things of that nature. The things that we're not really designed to do as creative people. We're not very good accountants. So that definitely can impact our process considerably. But yeah, with that movie, that's a very fond memory for me, and the creative team was so supportive. We had a very short period of time to score that movie. So it was one of the better experiences I had. And it was one of the first number ones I had. I think it was You Got Served and then Dawn of the Dead, or vice versa, both within 3 weeks, which was pretty amazing, especially considering I couldn't get an interview for another job for about 6 months. And the next thing I did was like a Lou Diamond Phillips, Brooke Shields miniseries, because that's all there was available at the time. So you never know what's going to come next in the business. It's very humbling.
You don't. And it's a great lesson for all the music students out there that, even people like Tyler Bates, have to take the roll with the punches. But I want to ask you, because this was the beginning of one of, your career is defined by these very close relationships with very powerful commercial visionary directors. And was this your first film with Zack Snyder?
Yeah, it was his first film.
Yeah. And this was you then carried on to do several more films with him. Could you just talk a bit about, because this is something that is very important to you, these relationships with the directors, and you've spoken in the past about discovering a director sound with them and then evoking it. If you could just talk a little bit about how you did that on Dawn of the Dead and then on the subsequent films with him.
Well, I had an idea for what I thought the score could be. Fortunately, really, I would never have gotten Dawn of the Dead if it wasn't for the music supervisor, G. Mark Roswell. We were working on a Mario Van Peebles movie called Badass, and G Mark said, I think you'd be great on Dawn of the Dead. And at the time, I had no horror music in my repertoire. I mean, that's been natural to me. I'm typically a dark music kind of person, but I thought, I'm like, well, how the hell am I going to get this movie? You know, it's a Universal movie. The only studio movies I'd had up to that point had failed miserably at the box office. And so he liked how I worked with Mario, so he suggested I write a couple pieces of music based on the script. He floated me the script. And eventually, after meeting everybody, several weeks into that process, they hired me. And I had thought a lot about what would be an interesting premise for the score and a backdrop. And, you know, obviously there's some contemporary classical works that inspired some of the atmosphere besides the synth stuff. And this is pretty much before it had become trodden because that whole 20th century classical sort of atonal work has become very commonplace now, but 18 years ago it was not as much. But it was fun, definitely, to delve into that.
So next up, we can go in one or two directions. You can be the game master here. We can either go further down the Zack Snyder direction and get into 300 and a whole bigger scale of film, or into
Sure.
further into the horror direction. Okay, let's play a clip from 300, which was the next thing that you did with Zack, and it's a very different type of piece.
Xerxes dispatches his monsters from half the world away. They're clumsy beasts. And the piled Persian dead are slippery.
You still here?
Somebody's gotta watch your back.
No, now I'm a little busy.
Okay, I want to hear how you came up with this. This is to victory, right?
Well, I guess I don't remember all the titles, but you know, it's interesting. If you look now, I can look back at a career, even though I still feel like I'm just beginning. It's a tapestry, so it's entirely interleaved. And many years ago, I became friends with Azam Ali, who's a very well-known world music vocalist, and she's Persian, and we were doing a record at the time. And so because of her background and what I'd known about it, I showed her what we were doing on 300, because 300 started right after Dawn of the Dead. Zach called me up and said, hey, do you know Frank Miller's 300? I'm ignorant. No, I didn't know it. So I went over to his house and he showed me the comic book or the graphic novel rather, and gave me an outline of what he was looking to do to create a presentation to actually get someone to finance the movie. So we began working on that for probably 15 months of me doing music for Animatics. Matter of fact, the Animatic that sold that movie to Warner Brothers, The Pitch, was with the actor Scott Glenn that was recorded over at my studio, and he did like a narrative overview of the story condensed into 3 minutes of music and two-dimensional visuals that were derived from the actual artwork from the comic book itself, or the graphic novel itself, rather. And
did you score that animatic?
yeah, I did music for puppets, pictures, clothes, everything that was presented. So Azam, she and I were doing a record at the time of our own music, and she sang on the initial pitch animatic for me, and she, of course, is incredible, and Zach loved her voice, and so that was, the entree for her to be the main voice in the score throughout. Besides mine, which is I had no idea how to mock up a choir, so I created like a phonetic faux Latin language for that film, and I sang all the men's parts and the women's parts because they're not all the same vowels and consonants simultaneously. It's a cluster to create percussive sound. So I didn't know what else to do but to sing all the parts. So in the final product, you hear my voice, which is kind of has that sort of real throat sound, and then 60 other singers. We just kept it in there. And actually, just out of necessity, this is what composers do, right? It's like midnight, I'm working on a sequence, and this is where the captain draws the spear into his abdomen. He's going to die, right?
Yeah.
Well, I had this idea for some kind of headspace moment, because obviously this was the first film, I think, of its generation where you had that type of slow motion coming out of fast action, and scoring that is very tricky. But so I went into a headspace moment there, and I needed a male operatic vocal. And I figured, okay, I'll just put something there as a placeholder to suggest that's what I want to do. And at the time, Tim Williams, who is my very good friend and has worked with me starting actually on Devil's Rejects, but he conducted the score for 300 and orchestrated it. And we've worked on a ton of things together since. But he was my next door neighbor. So the next morning after I recorded this, I called him to come over and take a listen. And he started laughing. And he said, I would just leave it. I wouldn't have another singer do it. It sounds great. So I never really spoke. I never spoke about it, but it's been sitting there. And then Azam also was aware of Jonathan Wilson, who is a friend of hers. And he has a company called Togaman. And he created the guitar viol, which is a bowed, like a viola da gamba, but kind of more modern era. And so she thought I would do something interesting with that instrument in the context of this music, this score. And so I did get the one guitar viol that was available for like, I don't know, there weren't going to be any more for like 6 months. So Jonathan brought it over, and I got a hold of that instrument, and since then have made a lot of interesting sounds, and it's taken me on several journeys musically and many different styles of music since that time. But that's one of the main color elements in 300.
The guitar viol is kind of your instrument. I mean, I've seen you play it a lot, use it in a lot of your soundtracks. What is it that draws you to that particular sound?
I think it forces me to play different figures, different ideas. Like I have to think differently to do it. It's obviously I'm not as free on that instrument as I am on a guitar. On a guitar I can do whatever I want. The guitar viol is such an unforgiving instrument. It's very, very challenging to play it and get it to sound good. And probably me just jumping into it with no practice or technique. I probably just created my own technique with it because I knew the sound I wanted to get from it. But it actually has kind of a reed instrument quality. It can sound nearly like a saxophone, and that's where I began, was playing saxophone in my life. So I'm very fond of the wood instruments. Yeah. But yeah, I thought it would be an interesting way of creating discordant sound and those harmonics that I could generate from that instrument would be a really great concentric point where the orchestra meets the more modular synthesis, sound design elements of the score. So it sort of served as a band-aid of sorts to bring those worlds together, those sounds. I wasn't thinking of it that strategically. I just felt it because I typically write in frequencies more than I do traditional instrumentation. So,
Yeah.
I guess I come at this from an unorthodox, with an unorthodox perspective, but that's just always made sense to me, is to think of the tonal frequency of the voices of the actual actors and the sound design. What is the landscape going to suggest to us sonically and tonally,
Yeah. So we have a question from the floor for you, from Leopold the Bandit. How do you deal with making historical music that fits the scene while still making it entertaining and dealing with producers?
Well, that's a very long answer to that question. I mean, going into any project, as a composer, we have to understand that regardless of the methodology that our bosses, our directors, our producers, the studio, whatever they deploy, is about making the greatest thing they can create. And we have to be mindful of that. And so the methodology doesn't necessarily fit our what we would like as far as our emotional interaction with the project. And also, once the music is sketched out or it's in the movie, it's no longer within our control. So it can be edited. However, they can exploit certain aspects of the music and de-emphasize others because we have to deliver in stems. What I try to do is to create the most convincing expression of an idea, and I wouldn't say that I'm appropriating historic culture. I mean, but we kind of are in storytelling to some extent. We have to evoke an impression of what it was like. Now, 300 is clearly a graphic novel, and it's not a literal telling of history. I mean, yes, there are some loose referential aspects to the Battle of Thermopylae and things of that sort, but the reality is entertaining. And Zack Snyder, when you get to know Zack, he's a very upbeat guy, and he's very athletic. He really likes music a lot, but he's a very athletic guy, and he just wants it to kick ass. And that's what this music had to embody. It had to embody a masculinity, but also a sensitivity, because there are some emotional dynamics in this movie that are a little bit more complex than they read the first time you watch this film. So that aside, it still was an opportunity, the way Zack created the opportunity cinematically to make a statement that had never been made before. It was that also with the music. It required it to be something that has never existed in that form. There's obviously, when you're doing any music that is evoking some historical idea, there are tons of references that you can find in Lawrence of Arabia. They're all there. Basically that, and all the Jewish songs from history. Every epic film is in those songs. If you've ever been to a Friday night service, you'll hear them all.
Many.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, actually.
But I love you keep using this word that I completely agree with, and I use it because I do a lot of historical stuff. Evoke. It's very important. You can never ever replicate a historical period, but if you're sensitive and you're smart and you really do your homework, you can evoke it. And hearing you talk about working with that Persian singer, well, I've got two sort of roads. One is collaboration. You found this singer, you collaborated with them. Your work is studied with collaborations like this. And it seems to be very important to you. We're going to come back to that. The other thing, which is going to lead to our next clip, is you were talking about writing music that is right for the film. And that brings us to your work with James Gunn on Guardians of the Galaxy, where you actually wrote pieces of music from script stage that then ended up in the finished film. And even beyond that, he brought your music to set and had the actors play it while they were shooting scenes, which is very rare. So, but I want to get into that, and we'll get into that by playing a sequence from Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. We're going to play the Groot cocoon sequence, please.